Hello, KGS friends and family. Welcome back to Music Appreciation. So, I'm often asked by audience members, by my friends, by my family even, Vlad, what is it on earth that a conductor actually does? So, people I see are really interested and they're really excited by seeing the interaction between a conductor and an orchestra, and they are amazed by the gestures that a conductor enacts up there, but they're completely baffled by what they actually are and why they're done. And the most common question that I always get is, Vlad, if you stop waving your arms around, will they stop playing? That's my favorite question of all time. So let's see if we can decode this process a little bit better and have a good sense maybe of what conducting actually is. So here we go. What is conducting? So there's a quote by Leonard Bernstein that I always like to use when I teach conducting, and that's conducting is a black art. Now, what I think he meant by that was it's not a purely technical enterprise that can be reproduced and learned from a book. There's an element of magic, I guess, something that you can't teach that goes into it for sure. But at its foundational core, there are some elements that you can trace out. And the way that I put them are there's the technical element, the logistical element, and the emotional. Now, the emotional we're going to get to in just a moment because there's really no even clear description of what that is. But the first two are a little bit less evasive. So we'll start with those. The technical element is quite literally what your hands are doing. What does the right hand do? What does the left hand do? Depending on what hand you hold the stick in, what does the stick do? So it's entirely about the gestural communication of the hands. And because it's the hands specifically, it's a more common language between all conductors. You'll have slight variations. Obviously, every conductor is going to have his or her own specific style, but there's a common language that they use with their hands, which is why every orchestra intuitively understands it. The logistical side is purely about how you speak to an orchestra. So, this, of course, is done during rehearsal. You don't speak to them during the concert. And this one is much more unique to each conductor and to each orchestral situation. So, the verbal side is how do you rehearse? In other words, how do you verbally get an interpretation across to a group of professional musicians when your hands haven't been enough to do the work? So, no matter how clear you are sometimes with your hands in terms of what you want, you can't communicate every single detail at every single moment. There's just too much. And that's why you speak. And that's when the logistical element starts to really be at play. How do you get an interpretation across? How do you correct something that was done? How do you get musical ideas across to the people that are actually making the sound that you have in your mind? Okay, so coming back down to earth now a little bit from all of the esoteric emotional side is what is the technical side specifically now? What are the physical elements of conducting technique? And those are the right hand, the left hand, the face, and the body. Now the stick can be in either hand. Most people are right-handed, so it's more often than not in the right hand, but there's no law, of course. So the way that I like to put it again for my students is at the very core of foundational level, the right hand shows time, so how fast you play. The left hand shows quality of how you play, so louder, softer, shorter, longer, etc. And the face and the body are one unit. More often though, the face is doing more of the work. So the face and the body together show character. That's the important part, and that's more the emotional side that you saw in those previous conducting pictures. You can't show that kind of emotion with your left hand. There's only so much that the shape of a hand can do in terms of emotionality. So that's where the face and the body really, really come in. The face is going to do more of the work just with the eyes. The eyes themselves are incredibly powerful, and even in everyday life, just the way that you look at somebody, the way that your eyebrows move tells them a lot about what it is you're trying to say. If you start using more of your body in addition to your face, it tells that much more information. Now, there are a lot of schools of thought about this. A lot of people say the body shouldn't move whatsoever because it's just a distraction. That's a very respectable point of view. In practice, though, I don't think I've seen too many conductors that don't use their bodies at all. It's too natural to want to communicate with all of yourself. And again, I always come back to this idea of there's no textbook to this stuff. So it's your entire core of who you are, from your arms to your face to your body, is what a conductor is. Okay, so what is the right hand specifically doing? So what I mean by the right hand tells you how fast to play is that in music you have a number of bars, a number of measures. The further subdivision of those bars is called the beat. So each bar has a certain number of beats, and depending on how many beats, the right hand will have a certain gestural pattern that is associated with those beats. So if there are 4 beats to a bar, the right hand will go down, left, right, and up. If there are 3 beats in the bar, the right hand will go down, right, and up. If there are 2 beats, it'll just be down and up in a J-like motion almost. Now, how fast, or how quickly, let's say, the right hand goes from down to left to right to up is how fast the orchestra plays. You can have in one bar 1, 2, 3, 4, down, left, right, up, or 1, 2, 3, 4, down, left, right, up. So what the right hand does in terms of how fast it gets from one beat to the next will tell the orchestra how fast the beats in that bar occur and how fast they have to play all of the notes, all of the rhythms within those beats. That's at its core what the right hand is all about. All right, so here are some very theoretical reproductions, very, very theoretical, of what a 4-beat pattern would look like. So this is the kind of stuff that you see in a conducting textbook. Of course, there's no way to perfectly emulate in every single bar this perfect pattern. So what generally happens in actual practice is it looks something like this. Of course, it still goes down, left, right, and up, but every conductor is going to have his or own unique way of making that clear. For our theoretical purposes, though, imagine now you have a stick in your right hand, and imagine trying to trace with the tip of the stick, trying to trace any one of these patterns. Just imagine starting at the top, going down, curving to the left, curving to the right, curving upwards again, and then repeating that. That is what I mean by a gestural pattern. You're telling the orchestra with each change of direction, first of all, how many beats there are in that bar, and how fast to get from beat to beat. Now, I said, 2, 3, or 4 beats. There can be any number of beats in a bar. There can be 5, 6, 10, 11, 12. There's all kinds of combinations. And let's say the more new the music is, usually, because a lot of this changes in the 20th century, the meter doesn't stay the same. So these patterns change from bar to bar. In other words, the meter is the number of beats in a bar. That's the technical term. So you can have, like in this piece that I'm learning right now by Stravinsky, The Rite of Spring. In one bar, he's has 5 beats. In the next bar, it's 6 beats. Then it's 5/8 notes, which is 2 plus 3. It's a very specific type of pattern. So without getting too complicated, these things are incredibly dependent on what the composer wants to do. Regardless, though, whatever beat patterns you have to put one next to the other, it's primarily the responsibility of the right hand to communicate to the orchestra with these gestural, these preconceived gestural patterns, what the meter is. All right, so the left hand is already getting a little more complicated because, like I said now, there is less of a common language all of a sudden when you get to quality of sound. So the right hand, the gestures are preset. A 4-beat pattern is a 4-beat pattern. Every conductor knows that if they want to show 4 beats in a bar, you go down, left, right, up, in your own variation of that gesture. Now the left hand, though, shows quality of sound. So there is no official gesture for what it means to play louder than you were playing before, or softer than you were playing before, or somewhat softer, somewhat louder, somewhat longer and more connected, or maybe shorter and choppier. All of these adjectives now no longer have a clear gestural vocabulary anymore that is common to all conductors. So for me, again, this is the way I like to teach it, is if you are in the middle of a quiet room where someone's giving a speech, for example, let's say a church, and all of a sudden, if you have a child with you, let's say the child starts to yell very, very loudly in the middle of this quiet room, and everyone turns and looks in your direction. At that very moment, you want to make that child go from as loud as he or she is to as soft as humanly possible. What would your left hand do at that point if you had no voice? What would your left hand specifically do to show to that child that I want you to go from loud to incredibly soft? That very general example is, believe it or not, what conducting vocabulary actually is. We're using the gestures of common everyday life in a very tempered way that can denote very, very specific things. Now, of course, throughout time, these things have been done so many times that there is a general idea of what to do with your left hand to make something louder or to make something softer. It's incredibly general, though. It's incredibly skeletal, is something that I want to reinforce. So the left hand already becomes a little more ineluctable, let's say, than the right hand. But the left hand is where most of the detailed music making actually occurs. So if the left hand is where the most detailed music making happens, the face and the body are now responsible for the larger picture. So if you think of the left and the right hand as a microcosm of music making, the face and the body are now the macrocosm. And what I mean by that is they don't give you specific musical content. They don't tell you necessarily that you want something loud or soft. They can, with enough of a relationship between the conductor and the orchestra, but that takes a lot of time. Any conductor, though, with the right control of his or her own face and body in communication, can generate a state of mind. That is, again, returning now to this esoteric idea of the emotional aspect of what it is we do. We are conduits of an emotional state of mind. of specifically our own personal emotional state of mind while reproducing this music. Now, what tie that emotional state has to do with the content of the music is incredibly personal, and there's no answer to that. I play the second movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, for example, and I am absolutely crushed. Another conductor said to me once in the same movement where I felt crushed that it was a light, pleasant dance movement. So that's the kind of polar opposite that you're dealing with here. And that's fine. That's exactly what this is all about. There's no boundary and there's no prescribed idea of what you're supposed to feel at any given moment. But in my experience anyway, the conductors that are most beloved are the ones that have that capacity to transmit something emotional. They might not always be the most clear for the orchestra, and unfortunately, there's, at least in terms of what I've seen, there's usually an inverse relationship between clarity and emotionality. For me personally, if I had to choose, I would veer towards the side of emotionality because that's why we do this. Clarity is how we do this and how we do this well, and it's crucial by all means. But emotionality is why we do this. It's why we listen to music. It's why we go to concerts. It's why we care to begin with. Okay, so to kind of round this all up, then I want to leave you with a conducting clip of my own. This is the Romanian Rhapsody Number 1 in A major by George Enescu. This was done in 2015 with the Royal Camerata. This is in Bucharest, Romania. And let me put it this way. This is probably the most fun I've ever had on a podium in my life. So for me, this is what conducting is. And if there is a contention, I guess, always between clarity and emotionality, for me, in this case anyway, I veered more towards the side of emotionality just because it was just that easy to do with this kind of piece. But nevertheless, you can still tell very clearly what meter I'm in at what given point, what conducting gesture I have at that point. There are times when the left hand is clearly trying to show a little louder, a little softer, a cue for which instrument to come in. So all of these elements of conducting are kind of brought together, I guess, in this piece. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. Like I said, this is for me what conducting is. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time.